So obviously, congratulations on your appointment, Cabinet Secretary. You've come out this week and said that you you do not plan to pause the SFS. The way that farmers have interpreted that is that you are not prepared for change. You are not prepared to move any of the boundaries when it comes to SFS. What reassurance can you give to those farmers that are worried that you're not going to bring about change right now?
Well, first of all, to make clear that that they shouldn't be interpreting that there won't be any change. We've got a period now where we've had the results of the consultation in, lots of responses. So we need to absorb them. Many of those responses have come in on email. So we're genuinely taking a pause here to reflect on what those consultation responses have shown, but also, by the way, reflecting on the other discussions that I've had since I've come into post, including with leaders of the farming unions, which have been genuinely really of a good nature, constructive, to see where we have, at least at a high level, agreement, and where we have, as I frequently describe them now, some knotty issues we need to work on. So I think farmers can take the very clear message that we are not just genuinely listening at the moment, but we're looking through those consultation responses, the ideas that are within them, the concerns that are within them as well, and also the responses that have come in, not just from the farming community, but from wider stakeholders as well. Because I'm convinced that if we move, when we move ahead, not if we move ahead, but when we move ahead, we do it in a way that the scheme is good and solid and well-grounded, and we have agreement across everybody, because we cannot deliver this without farmers in Wales coming with us. This has to be taken forward together, otherwise it will fail.
You've mentioned that you've received thousands of responses for the SFS consultation. Can you genuinely say that every single consultation response will be reviewed?
Yeah, entirely. It's the way we do it. So we will look at not just the broad brush of responses, but the detailed responses as well. And some of those responses will have had really insightful individual suggestions as to different ways the scheme could operate. So we'll take on board all of those suggestions. So some of them around the obvious things. I don't want to preempt where we go, and you'll have to appreciate that, because I think there is a need to engage with the sector and wider stakeholders. But some of those have been around what are the best way to do the carbon lock-in. Mm-hmm. Is the one of the big controversies in the consultation, where there was a lot of concerns expressed, was around the perception or reality of what was within the trees and so on, in the trees proposals. But there's been also some good ideas coming in. Well, there's other ways to do this with the carbon sequestration within the soil, within grassland, etc., etc. So we're keen to look at some of those aspects.
Are you saying there's movement on that 10% tree target then?
No, I'm not saying there's movement. You're jumping me into something that I've deliberately and very clearly said we'll reflect on, we'll engage with stakeholders on before we design a scheme to take forward. But what I'm convinced of is, and the reason that I've said we won't do a wholesale pause on this, mm-hmm. is because when we have met with the farming community since the consultation has closed and since I've come into post, we've been taken by the extent of agreement on the framework mm-hmm. that we have, and also on the high level objectives. The farming community in Wales and the farming unions, and I think the vast majority of farmers, agree with what we're trying to do here, which is we're trying to create a sustainable future for farming in all its interpretations. Mm-hmm. And that includes the economic vitality of those farms and farm businesses, and the great diversity of those farm businesses across Wales, because they really vary significantly. But also the sustainability in how we jointly and together tackle what are real, imminent, pressing nature and climate emergencies and biodiversity challenges. Plus, of course, within the scheme, we need to design it in a way that genuinely rewards farmers for the additional stuff they do on top of some of the best quality food production mm-hmm. in any Western European nation, and the investment they put into it. But on top of that, they should be rewarded for the things they do in order to help us tackle, for example, flood alleviation further down the catchments, or for river water quality, or for wildlife, and so on. And that's where we need to get the scheme right. So will there be any change? Well, I'd be surprised based on the consultation responses we've had if there wasn't any change. But I'm not going to preempt where those might be, because that's another stage of dialogue now with farming unions and other stakeholders.
But the plan obviously is to launch this scheme in January next year. There is a lot to be considered. And like you say in your words, those knotty elements need to be resolved.
Yeah.
You know, we need to go through all the consultation, there needs to be the piloting, the co-design.
Yeah.
For that to be launched in January 2025, do you think that's realistic, and will it be fully ready in that time? Or are we going to get a repeat of what happened with the Habitat Wales scheme when it wasn't fully consulted on and there were a host of issues that came after it?
Yes, it is realistic as long as there's goodwill and faith and trust on all sides to make it happen. And as I say, what has struck me is, and I say this both as coming in now as the new cabinet secretary, but also my previous role where I was a member of the Climate Change Committee, I literally, quite literally, walked out of one role into the other. We were taking evidence on the sustainable farming scheme, and I was called out to say, you might want to make a call to Cathays Park in Cardiff because the First Minister wants to speak to you. In that role and since taking the role, I've been struck with the degree of agreement there is on significant parts of the future of sustainable farming. But, and here's the big but, it's whether we can in a timely way as well. And we've started this process, by the way, whether we can in a timely way get agreement to move forward on the knotty issues. Now, those knotty issues, by the way, are well known. But we don't need to set up years of co-production, as the phrase goes. If we know where they are, and there's an element of work that's been done already, and as part of the consultation, people have fed in alternative ideas already, some of those alternative ideas substantiated with evidence, data, and so on, then that gives us a good base to move quite rapidly to unpick those knotty areas and move forward. But it may be, for example, that it may well be that some we just have to do a little bit more work on. And that may mean not everything proceeds right at the same time, right at the same pace. But bear in mind, by this time next year, if we do not have a scheme in place, we have to decide what else do we do for farmers in Wales. So I think to deliver certainty to farmers, as much as to deliver on the objectives that we all share, we need to agree where we can agree. And I think there could be substantive agreement. And then on those areas where we haven't got agreement yet, work rapidly to resolve them and be open to ideas.
But ultimately, Cabinet Secretary, you need to get farmers on board with SFS. You need them to sign up to this scheme, because essentially if they don't sign up to this scheme, then the climate environmental targets that the government are being held account to will not be met. Are you confident that you can get that sign up that you need?
It'll require goodwill and faith and trust on all sides. I repeat that. But I hope that coming into this role, I bring not only a degree of understanding of the farming community, but also the wider environmental sector. It's something that I've had both at a professional and a personal level, a degree of empathy and understanding with for many years. If there is a will amongst all of us to do it the Welsh way, which is to collaborate, cooperate, bust through some of these issues with the degree of urgency that they require, then yes, then I'm confident that we can do this together. It will not be a top-down approach. It will not be a minister says this, or farmers unions say this, or wildlife groups say this. This really has to be together, because this is the long-lasting resolution we are seeing of something that started at the moment we left the EU. When we saw the end of the old direct payments come in, when we saw the end of the Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 and the Common Agricultural Policy, we knew this day would come. It's no surprise to me that we've got some areas, as we come to the point where we have to make decisions, that are still proving difficult. But the other thing to say is, there are things here that we need to keep dynamic within this. So as new evidence emerges, as new science comes forward, new ways of solving some of these problems, we have to devise a scheme that can also take that into account. Now, I am not the font of all knowledge on this, but we have some great people in Wales, in the farming community, in the academic and research community, who do so much with farming and wildlife, and also within the wider wildlife environmental sector. So if there's a will and faith and trust to make this happen, yes, we can make this happen on time, but with an intelligent, crafted approach to delivering it.
Obviously, we had the protests outside the Senedd around those three areas, those knotty areas. Today, one of the organisers from that protest is saying they're planning for another protest because they just don't feel like they're being heard. What would you say to those people that are planning that protest?
I can't make a difference to whether an individual organiser of a protest decides to organise another protest. I would simply say to them, my commitment to genuinely engage on these issues is sincere. What I won't do, however, is walk away, not just from the need to design a sustainable scheme for farming that will deliver viable farming businesses across the whole of Wales, that will protect our language and our culture and deliver small and medium scale farms, particularly, that are the backbone of rural communities. But I will not walk away either from the need to tackle those pressing challenges of the climate and nature emergency. So there are some out there who are saying, let's throw this climate nonsense in the bin. Let's throw this nature nonsense. There's not many, by the way, but some are. And I recollect at the large protest that there was at the Senedd, there was regrettably from a small segment of the audience, and it may not have been farmers themselves, but there was booing of the message from the farming unions when they said, and we have to tackle the climate emergency as well. There was booing. Now, I will not walk back from that, because it is my promise to our children and grandchildren that we leave farming in Wales with the gift of a better sustainable form of support for years and generations to come.
But it's worth flagging that it's not clear whether those were farmers at the protest that were, and they were very much in the minority.
Precisely.
The majority of the people that came to that protest that day were really concerned, and there were young people, young children and families, small families, young entrants who are really, really frightened about the future of their industry.
I agree entirely. It doesn't represent the majority of farmers. It may not even represent the farming community. But there was a vocal minority who was in that crowd on the day, who were then and subsequently are still on social media decrying the need to tackle the climate emergency. And you will see them there attacking statements that whenever the mention of climate change or nature emergency comes up. This is why I come back to the leadership that we all need to show on this. When I represent a constituency called Ogmore. It's what's often described by the London-based media as a former coalfields community. It's far more than that. But it is a South Wales former industrial community where lots of people will commute out there to Cardiff and Bridgend. But when you stand in the bottom of any of those stripped valleys and you raise your eyes, you are looking at the upland hill farming. 40% of my former coalfield constituency is upland hill farming. Those hill farmers do not make a mint. Those hill farmers normally have family members that work as a teacher, or they run a business down the road, or they run plant equipment hire. It's a very familiar story. And the nature of farming across Wales is slightly different in some ways from in overall characteristic from the nature of farming across wider England. It tends to be smaller, tends to be more embedded, more diverse, and also where there's long been diversification because out of necessity, they've had to do other things. But on that basis, they recognise when I speak to people like Katie on the top of the Bulk Mountain or people like Howell down in Blackmill, they absolutely share that imperative to deliver the type of farming that is really good for the environment. They may not, like me very often, understand all the technical details and the ins and out, but they want good soil, they want good water quality, they don't want to damage towns downstream in that strip valley
And
because
that, I
water
think that is
running. Yeah,
representative of the majority of Welsh
absolutely.
farming community, but ultimately
Yes,
they are businesses as well, and
indeed.
they have families that want to take over those businesses and the future generations, and ultimately they need to be able to have that margin. And at the moment they are in the dark of what actually the payments are going to be within the sustainable farming scheme, which is so far behind to what over the border in England with the SFI, they're already ahead with the payment options.
So in England, the amount of money that they're putting into this is less. In England also, they're doing a piecemeal approach. We are trying to bring forward a coherent, long-lasting, dynamic scheme that will do the job of maintaining viable farm businesses and tackling those wider nature, ecological, environmental issues as well. And we're convinced that we can do it, and we should do it once and well, and then adjust it as the years go by. So we're trying to do something different. But let me just say one thing frankly as well, which and my style of when I've been a minister previously and now is that I tend not to make political points, but I'll make factual points.
Mm.
We have been, the farmers of this country and the environmental groups and the Welsh people have been betrayed by the settlement that we've now been left when we withdrew from the EU. We have a quantum less of funding going into agricultural support. So we, for example, this year have maintained the BPS payments within Wales at the same level. And I think that has, by and large, gone down quite well with the farming community as a way forward. But we are stretched, I have to say. You mentioned our other wider environmental payments. It's because we are stretched on our budget. So my appeal to the UK government would be to say, deliver us what you promised you would deliver us when you said we would not have a penny less going into rural communities and into farming. That has not happened in Wales. And when we talk about vulnerable, valuable and vulnerable farming communities in our rural areas, we demand that money be made, because then some of the knotty issues, curiously, that we're looking at within the sustainable farming scheme going forward, we could resolve because we could have additional resource to help. But the fundamental point is this: when we look at the future of those upland hill farms, lowland farms, extensive farms, intensive farming, all of them are going to rely not simply on money being allocated to some of the best quality food production we know happens here in Wales, but it's also going to be going into those farms to the direct benefit of everything else they do: the planting of the hedgerows, the water quality, the soil quality, the good grassland coverage, the herb inlays, all of these sorts of things. That's the sort of stuff we're trying to get out of a comprehensive scheme, and it's quite different from the piecemeal approach they're taking in England at the moment.
And I think, what farmers want is that balance between food and environment. And obviously the food and drink sector in Wales contributes a huge amount to the economy. And I think some farmers just have this concern that the balance isn't quite right at the moment. What would you say to them?
Work with us. Give us your ideas. I spend a lot of time, not just now as I've come in cabinet secretary, but it happens to be part of my happens to be part of my friends and my family who are involved in farming. I spend a lot of time on some of the most beautiful acres within Wales, throughout Wales, speaking with farmers. Give us your ideas of how we do this all together. What I guarantee is that we will genuinely listen and we will grab the best ideas, make no doubt about it, because one thing I fully recognize is we cannot deliver the multiple benefits we're trying to do of vital, economically vibrant farms and the wider benefits we're trying to do unless it's delivered by and with farmers. So we will rely on their ideas. And, that doesn't mean we'll always agree. We're going to have to compromise in some areas. But we've always been clear in Wales. It's a little bit, in a sense, like some of our European neighbours have done quite cleverly over the years, even within the old Common Agricultural Policy. They've sought to they've sought to align payments with the type of farming that they want to see. Farming that's good, that provides good local fresh produce, that provides the highest of standards, and provides those other multiplicity of benefits. Now, they've done it under the old cap. The one benefit I would say, even though we've lost money to Welsh farming, thanks to the UK government, as we've left the EU, they could have given us every penny. I'm still asking them for it. One of the benefits we do have is the freedom now to work with farming and other stakeholders to say, let's design a scheme that is fit for now and for future generations.
I've spoken to the Shadow DEFRA Secretary Steve Reed and the Shadow Environment Minister Daniel Zeichner on multiple occasions over the last couple of months, and they have very much kind of taken a distance from what's going on in Wales. And you know, the Shadow DEFRA Secretary has said there is an issue, a challenge with the farming policy, that it's not right. So they're kind of distancing themselves from your policy. What do you make of that?
Oh, look, devolution. The nature of devolution is we have the ability to do things that are suited to Wales, not to England. We also have to work on a cross-border basis, by the way. I've just come out of oral questions, my first session of oral questions, a lot of discussion over farming, but also things like water quality. And we have the 7, the Usk, the Y, which don't respect borders. So we've got to work actually across and with both with governments and also with farmers and landowners across different sectors. So I guess, look, I will be meeting very shortly with my UK Labour counterparts, as I will be meeting, I hope very soon, and I've started to do those conversations, by the way, bilaterally with my UK Conservative counterparts as well, both potential government in waiting and the current government. And what I'd like to see is, broadly speaking, fewer brickbats being thrown back and forth. Look at how well we're doing, look at how poorly they're doing, back and forth, and actually respecting the fact that within post-devolution politics, there is the ability to do things differently. There is also, by the way, things to learn. I recall when I was a DEFRA Environment Minister under Hilary Benn, the Secretary of State at the time, we genuinely burnt the midnight oil with farmers then, trying to devise quite complex, but really intelligent approaches for upland hill farming in all parts of that would be suitable for interpretation at that time within Wales, allow some divergence, but also fitted the hills of Cumbria, the North Yorks Moors and Dartmoor and so on there. And I think as well as allowing devolution to reflect the best of the different nations of Wales, there's probably also some learning back and forth that needs to be done, but that requires a maturity of government ministers and so on. I guess my worry is in the political part of the political cycle we're currently in.
Yeah.
There may be less appetite for that, but maybe after the election, whichever colour of political party is at a UK level, there might be more scope for sitting down with colleagues and saying, what are you doing well over there? What are we doing well over here? Let's learn from each other.
And something that farmers would argue England are doing well is tackling bovine TB. And I know this is something that was brought up in the Senedd and you're taking questions on it. There is a real feel of frustration. I've done multiple roundtables on the border between Wales and England with farms that have been in perpetual TB for a decade or so. And they just feel in Wales, the situation with TB is not changing. We've seen that in England, 2023 recorded the lowest number of new TB incidences in the last 20 years. Here in Wales, the situation farmers feel is not changing. They want all tools, and I hate using that phrase, but all tools in the box to be available to them to try and tackle this disease head on. One of them being targeted in the wildlife, but this is something that, you know, previously you have been quite open about saying no to badger culling. So I think the question is, one, would you ever consider kind of tackling the disease in the wildlife or looking at that evidence? Because to say there isn't scientific evidence, there is from across the border. And I think farmers would argue that bovine TB policy has become this political tool being used, but actually at the heart of it, it is one of the big real concerns and frustrations and worries for farmers in Wales, and one that really impacts their mental health. So it's unfair for it to be used as a political tool.
Well, I would disagree that it's been used as a political tool, but there are different approaches being taken. And again, we should look not just across the borders, but also internationally about what works as well, in some of our near neighbours as well. The first thing to say on that is, as I mentioned in the chamber in response to questions on this just now, We are showing results in parts of Wales as well, in some of the areas that have been more deeply infected with BTB. So one of those, but only one of those areas, is within the Pembrokeshire Pathway approach, which I would say is groundbreaking. It's groundbreaking because it delivers autonomy for that farmer, the 15 farmers who are involved in that, to make decisions on their own farm, but they're doing it as part of a partnership with their own vet, because often the criticism is, well, it's all these vets coming in from heaven knows where and just telling us what we have to do, and they just arrive and tell us. Well, they're in the Pembrokeshire Pathway farms. What they're doing is working with their own vets, plus with support of our veterinary service, but plus with the support of our TB Centre of Excellence within Aberystwyth University, led by Professor Glyn Hewson. Real respect amongst all partners, but the farmer is in charge. Now, that sort of approach has meant it's not just England that is driving down the levels of new herd incidence. We're doing it in Wales in a different way.
But it's part
Now,
that
we
route's
are
part funded by farmers, not necessarily.
yeah, it's a partnership approach, but it is working. And you speak to people on the ground there, where I've been and met with these farmers, and they are, it's not unreasonable to say, quite evangelical about the approach that they've done, because it's not anymore being done to them. It's working with the good data that I saw when, crikey, 12 years ago when I was the DEFRA minister. We were starting to see then the quality of the data that was emerging on individual cattle and how you could use that forensically then. But we didn't have the toolkit of things to do. Now we do have the toolkit of things to do, and they're using them on farm measures, and it's really, really effectively. But let me just add one other thing to this question that you raised. I was at the launch today of the TB advisory group. That TB advisory group brings forward some really hefty expertise to advise the programme board, the TB eradication board. We've set it up deliberately to give that expert science-led advice. One of the things that they're looking at straight away here, which they didn't expect to be asked to do, but they are doing it, is the issue, the really emotive issue. I keep saying, farmers generally, my experience is that they are quite hardy individuals. They're used to putting up with a lot. But the trauma of going through on-farm slaughter, particularly if you have, for example, cows in calf and so on, is unforgettable and traumatic. So the TAG board are looking at that as a first piece of work, and then they move into others. I've said to them this morning, I'm not going to limit where they head as they look at the evidence of how we tackle BTB, this pernicious scourge right across the UK. It is current policy within the programme of government of this current government within Wales that badger culling is not part of the process, but badger vaccination is. And we have piloted successfully badger vaccination within Wales. But I'm not going to tell the TAG group where they should be heading to look at evidence of where we go on our next steps. That's for them to do. They are independent-minded. They will go where they want to go. But they've got a lot of work ahead of them. But I think the approach we're taking with that, of having the target date of 2041 for TB eradication in Wales, steered with a programme board, which involves, by the way, farmers and others with on it.
Yes,
but yeah, because I could see where you were heading, and I think there's been some understandable, perhaps, misunderstanding of what the advisory group is. The advisory group is exactly
that. Technical advisory group does find there is evidence to suggest that some targeted culling is needed in those high incidences areas, would you allow that to happen? You said that you would allow them to.
I'm not preempting or anticipating where that group will go whatsoever. The current programme of government is very, very clear that badger culling is not part of our policy. Badger vaccination is.
Thank you for your time, Cabinet Secretary.
Hey, not at all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.